Hello, and welcome to Face to Face. Today we're talking with journalist and independent filmmaker Kevin Pina. Kevin has done a lot of work in the country of Haiti, and he's very interested in Canada's role in the political situation in Haiti. Kevin, why don't you tell us a few things about yourself and why we're going to be discussing Haiti?
Well, as you said, my name is Kevin Pina. I'm a documentary filmmaker, an independent journalist. I first started covering Haiti, more than 15 years now, 1990, when Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was a Roman Catholic priest, ran for the presidency, entered the race 2 months before the elections, won in a landslide, 67% of the vote, largest plurality in the history of the hemisphere.
And this was
for any
when?
head of state, 1990. And I covered his campaign, his election victory, his first 6 months in office, and the brutal military coup that overthrew him in 1991. That was my first film, which was entitled Haiti, Harvest of Hope.
Now, before Jean-Bertrand Aristide, there had been for many, almost it seems like decades, an extremely brutal dictatorship in Haiti run by the Duvalier family.
Papa Doc and then Baby Doc Duvalier.
So many years of brutal dictatorship, the poorest country in the hemisphere, a horrible situation, and then all of a sudden along comes Aristide, who is somehow elected and becomes...
Well, not somehow elected. It's an interesting story. There, you know that the Catholic Church had been thrown out of Haiti on several occasions, the Jesuits in particular. And they've been seen as troublemakers throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly by dictatorships because of their philosophy of liberation, if you will. Duvalier had kicked out the Catholic Church and as response was actually excommunicated by the Pope in Rome. And in order to woo the Catholic Church back, Duvalier negotiated with them, and he became the only head of state in the history of the Catholic Church to be able to appoint his own bishops. So Duvalier, who was this dictator who had created this system of corruption based on this paramilitary group that he had created called the Tontomacuts, who were these dreaded paramilitaries who were responsible for kidnapping, torture, murder, horrendous brutality during his reign. The reign of his regime. The Catholic Church, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church became complicit in that system of corruption by virtue of this agreement between Duvalier and the Pope to restore the Catholic Church.
So this ran through the 1970s, the 1980s,
well, as a response,
with complicity of the U.S. government.
Well, yes, indeed. But as a response, what were called the Christian-based communities broke away from the Catholic hierarchy. And these were the students of Belgian priests who were part of the Jesuit order who had actually started Haiti's first literacy project during the Duvalier regime. And these guys were kind of smart, you know. There had been purges by the Catholic Church and by Protestant orders against voodoo, voodoo being the national religion of Haiti.
In the end, Aristide was elected prime minister, president?
Well, let me finish the story. So they had created this program, a universal literacy program, the first in the country, called Alpha, program Mission Alpha, the Mission Alpha. And they created a literacy book called Goûter Sel, which means a taste of salt in Creole. And it borrows from the voodoo lexicon, which says that in order for a zombie to reclaim his humanity, you give him a taste of salt and he will turn against the master. Well, they named the literacy book that, and the metaphor was not lost on Duvalier. Because what it meant was that to empower the people through reading meant that they would turn against Duvalier. And it was as a response to that Duvalier had attacked the church. And then there were the students of these Belgian priests who had begun that program, and that was Father Jean-Bertrand Aristide, that was Father Jean-Marie Vincent, that was Father Antoine Adrien, this whole new generation of Haitian priests who were affected by what was called Vatican II. And Vatican II, of course, was this new convocat of the Catholic Church, which said that there was a preferential option that was going to be given by the Catholic Church to the poor. Whereas a wealthy man was concerned with going to heaven, a poor man was necessarily concerned with feeding himself and surviving, and that the church had a responsibility to work with the poor before backing the demands of the rich.
Sounds good to me.
And that's how this movement, this liberation theology movement of these Christian-based communities, supported Aristide's candidate and ultimately catapulted him into the presidency in 1990.
So in 1990, Aristide becomes president of Haiti.
That's right.
What happens after that?
Well, 6 months in office, he tries to weed out corruption, he tries to change the country, and 6 months later there's a brutal military coup. I've been making a film about democracy coming to Haiti after 186 years of dictatorship and violence, and my entire first idea was washed away overnight with that coup, September 30th, 1991. I went to the people who were backing me on that film and I said, what should I do? And they said, well, take some more money and go back. So I went back and I chronicled just 3 weeks of utter hell of the military, people who I had met during the progress of making that documentary who were in hiding, many of them killed, forced into exile. Just utter brutality, indescribable brutality of the Haitian military, because really it was a message of terror. They knew that they were dealing, they had the tiger by the tail, which was the majority of the poor who had put Aristide into office, elected Aristide in these democratic elections, and the only weapon that they had to keep them in line was the message of terror. And so it was extremely brutal.
But following that, I seem to remember Bill Clinton was the president at that time. And
Bush.
The first Bush?
The first Bush was the
but
president.
But didn't, a few years later,
Clinton became president.
Aristide was back in Haiti. How long
Yeah,
did
well,
that
it was
take?
interesting. You know, people like to think that, well, Bill Clinton was a great president and this guy was an altruist because he returned Aristide after 3 years in exile in Washington in 1994. The truth is, you know, I was there. I was really close to this situation. Almost got killed for this story. The truth was that the Haitian military had become the largest drug traffickers on the island. They had overseen the transition from the Medellin cartel to the Cali cartel. And they were the major transshipment point. They turned Haiti into the major transshipment point for cocaine bound for the United States. And remember that the majority of these military officers had been trained in the School of the Americas. The majority, yes, had been trained in the United States. And the majority of them, it later came out, were actually still on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency during the period that they transformed Haiti into the major transshipment point for cocaine bound for the United States. They began to eat themselves alive fighting over the proceeds of the cocaine trafficking. So this institution that had been created by the United States was beginning to destroy itself over those cocaine proceeds. At the same time, there was a huge movement internationally, especially among the religious communities of the world, to return Aristide. Remember that the killing had reached such a level, the carnage had reached such a level that it was impossible to ignore any longer, and that there were, because of that, as a result, there were thousands of refugees fleeing Haiti and ending up in Miami, and it was turning into a huge scandal for the United States government. So, make a long story short, it was not altruism. That was not the real reason behind returning Aristide in 1994. And I think that what the United States military did makes that clear, because they did not disarm the death squads. They did not disarm the former military after Aristide disbanded them. Quite the contrary, they kept them in reserve. They let them keep their arms. And these were the same forces that would later overthrow Aristide a second time.
So
in
Aristide
2004.
Went back to Haiti in when?
94.
94. And when did he become the leader of Haiti? In 94?
No, he first was elected in 1990.
Right.
And then he was overthrown in 1991, September 30th. While he was in exile in Washington, well, this is interesting because when he was returned in 1994, 20,000 U.S. troops committed by Clinton to quote-unquote restore democracy, and I just explained to you why I don't think it was a restoration of democracy. But what was interesting is when Aristide returned, the majority of the electorate that had elected him in 1990, when he returned in 1994, demanded that he be allowed to fulfill those 3 years that he had spent in exile. Their point of view was that he wasn't acting as the president, actually, while he was in Washington in exile. Therefore, those 3 years should be given back to him. Well, it's interesting that the U.S. Embassy and the Clinton administration said, no, while you were in Washington, we treated you like you were the president, therefore you were the president, and those 3 years are lost to you and lost to the Haitian people forever.
Okay. So 1994, what happens? He's back?
He's back.
Who's the president or?
What he is.
He's the president again until?
He's restored until his mandate. Remember, they were elected for 5-year terms. He cannot succeed himself, so he can't run for a successive president.
Okay. So his term is up in 1995.
95.
Then
next year.
He's gone.
He's gone, and René Préval
becomes the president from 1995 until 2000.
Until 2000, that's right.
In 2000,
Aristide is re-elected.
That's
right.
Okay. So why is Haiti so important to, it seems, the governments of both the United States and Canada, so that at this time, it seems like both countries, Canada and the United States, were complicit in another coup that took place in 2004?
2004.
And removed Aristide again. Why? What's the story behind that?
Well, it's interesting. In the coup, after the coup in 1991, Canada actually played a sort of counterbalance to the U.S. bad guy. They kind of played a good cop, bad cop, where Aristide was concerned. France was also a little more ambivalent. In 2004, it was clear that they were all united in having funded the opposition to Aristide through non-governmental organizations and having helped to isolate the Aristide government, and the sort of unified sense that the Aristide government had to go. Canada, the United States, and France seemed to be very much on the same page February 29th, 2004. So much so that those three countries already had their military on the ground the moment that Aristide was forced onto a plane by 50 U.S. Marines and flown to the Central African Republic.
Maybe you can just go through that story of what actually happened in those few days, just quickly. I mean, was he kidnapped and removed from the country?
Well, it's interesting because there were these paramilitary forces. We're talking about death squads that had been trained by the Central Intelligence Agency that had been responsible for murder and mayhem after the 1991 coup. I'm speaking of FRAP, the Front for Advancement and Progress in Haiti, very well documented, CIA-created, funded paramilitary death squad. Elements of the former military, who I told you had not been disarmed after Aristide was returned in 1994, and he abolished the military. They began to regroup in the Dominican Republic, the neighboring Dominican Republic. Remember, it's the island of Hispaniola, which Haiti and the Dominican Republic share. They had been attacking from their safe havens in the Dominican Republic since 2002. These paramilitary forces of death squads and former military had been coming over from the Dominican Republic, going into townships in neighboring Haiti and killing Lavalas officials and their families. More than 70 Lavalas officials were killed between 2002 and 2004. And the Aristide government was protesting it, and the media was basically ignoring them. They were screaming to the wind. Look at these guys are in the Dominican Republic, and they're preparing an invasion. They're preparing a coup d'etat, and nobody would listen. Well, in February of 2004, after there had been built this so-called opposition movement to Aristide, and that's a longer, more detailed story of how they manipulated that, because I believe it was very much a manipulation, having lived there through that period of time. These same paramilitary forces came over from the Dominican Republic and started actually taking over townships and holding territory. Well, overnight, those same media that had been ignoring Aristide screaming about these paramilitary forces attacking and killing Lavalas officials, suddenly there were large stipends, there were reporters and camera crews sent to interview the quote-unquote rebels who were trying to overthrow Aristide. When they'd been there, of course, for 2 years previously, and they were being ignored when Aristide was bringing them to the attention of the media. Suddenly, these guys are falling all over themselves because this is a sexy story.
Well, some people say the media is totally corrupt too, so they do what they're told.
I wouldn't say totally corrupt, but I'd say that a strong case can be made that the corporate media, and certainly state-sponsored media like the CBC, get it wrong most of the time.
Yeah. So why, again, why is it important to Canada, the United States, and France that Aristide be removed?
Well, Aristide represented independence Aristide represented not playing the game of neoliberal economics.
Corporate economics.
Well, it's very specific. When you talk about the International Monetary Fund and you talk about the World Bank, you talk about neoliberal economics. And what that means is that you cannot invest in social programs. Aristide had invested in a universal literacy program where every adult between the age of 30 to 60 could go to a free literacy class. He had created what were called the Alpha Restos, which was a system of basically meals for the poor. The poorest of the poor were for an adoquin, 5 gourdes, 5 gourdes, about 18 cents. You could get a huge meal.
But this sounds good.
Well, of course it's good, but the point is that under neoliberal economics,
you can't do this.
You can't do this.
So this is part of the reason
You don't take money from your telephone company, and you don't take money from your electrical company, and you don't reinvest it into literacy programs. You're supposed to take the telephone company and the electric company, and you're supposed to put it out on the auction block to the highest bidder.
So
which Aristide refused to do. You're supposed to privatize.
So that's part of the reason why somebody like him has to be removed.
That, but also, again, you know, there has never been an independent leader in the history of Latin America and the Caribbean that has ever been tolerated by the United States government. Whether you go back to the example of Jacobo Arbenz and the CIA engineered coup against him in 1954, popular, democratically elected government, president, in Guatemala, overthrown by the CIA, Juan Bosch in the Dominican Republic in 1965, Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973, the overthrow of Aristide in 2004, the attempted overthrow of Chavez before that, and the current efforts of the U.S. government, along with the Canadian government again, to destabilize the democratically elected government of Hugo Chavez. Independence, any line, independent political line, that is more beholden to the interests of their own local people than it is to the interests of U.S. foreign policy will not, has not ever been tolerated in this hemisphere. And Jean-Bertrand Aristide was extremely independent by the standards, by the yardstick put forth by the U.S. Embassy in Haiti. He did not fit the bill of a leader who would play ball with them and therefore had to go.
And so Canada is part of this game?
Definitely. You can't, at this point, you cannot talk about U.S. foreign policy in the world without talking about Canadian foreign policy because they are virtually inseparable. Canada has come to play. Canadian foreign policy makes U.S. foreign policy possible in today's world. Canada, let me give you an example. The United States would not be able to wage the level of warfare that it is waging in Iraq today without the role that Canada is playing in Afghanistan. It's only because Canada is taking the pressure off of the United States military, who have already stretched themselves too thin in Iraq, that the U.S. is able to continue to maintain its level of warfare in Iraq today.
And also using our good name.
I think we're past that period. You no longer have a good name. Your good name's long gone. This is
so
not the
it should
Canada
be.
of my father, just like this isn't the United Nations of my father. The world has changed. There are no longer any such things as independent and neutral forces in the world today. The United Nations is no longer an independent and neutral force, and neither is Canada.
In Canada's defense, I'd just like to say that most Canadians know absolutely nothing about this. We're fed a line that is given to us by our corporate media. And, you know,
You're going to use
people believe
ignorance
it.
as a defense? Forgive me, man.
Yeah. I know it's not much of a defense, but there's some truth in it. It's up to people who do know what's going on to help create a media and put out information, and we try our best, but we are up against very powerful forces.
I don't know that Canadians are that ignorant. I mean, you've got the CBC, you've got
CBC
everyone.
is gone.
I'm
We
certain.
don't have
Do
the
you think
CBC.
that there's a single Canadian citizen who doesn't know that there are body bags coming back from Afghanistan?
When I listen to a lot of radio and people phone up and it's 50-50. A lot of people want Canada out, but a lot of people want Canada in.
But they know that there are body
In
bags
Afghanistan.
coming
They
from
know,
Afghanistan.
They know Canadian soldiers being killed there. But the argument that I hear from what sound like very good people, they truly believe that we're there in defense of democracy, that we're there in defense of helping the people of Afghanistan, that we're there supporting a democratic government, because that's the only message that the corporate media puts out, and a lot of people have no other source of information. So they listen to it, they hear it, and they believe it. And that comes through from the CBC as well as everywhere else.
I can believe that, and I see your point. I can see that point. However, I'd also say that there are some good voices. There are some wonderful voices, Canadian voices, journalists, who are trying to expose the truth, certainly around Haiti. Anthony Fenton has done an extraordinary job. You know, his stuff can be read extensively on ZNet. I understand that, I know ZNet isn't as well known as the CBC, but it is out there if people do look for it. And, you know, the internet is pretty widely used these days, I think even by Canadians. I don't think that we have that parlance just in the United States, and that it's out there if people want to dig beneath the surface. But maybe you're right. Maybe we need to do a better job of publicizing those alternative sources of information. And maybe we need to also do a better job of explaining to people why they're so important.
Yeah, it's very true. You mentioned earlier the role of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Now, usually when people hear NGO, they think of a group like the Sierra Club or Peace Group, or a good group out there of citizens doing good things. And yet in Haiti, and I guess in other places as well, the NGOs are a little bit different, and they're being used by the forces of power to play a different role. Maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Well, it's interesting. I think that Haiti marked a shift in the world in terms of how you define a coup d'etat, how you define the overturning of a constitutional government. Traditional coup d'etats are militaries who take power along with local elites to usually overthrowing a government. Again, that's not palatable to U.S. foreign policy, or at least that's the way it's come down traditionally, historically in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think Haiti represented a break from that. Haiti represents the modern coup d'etat. Today's coup d'etats are not military leaders getting on the television as they just did in Thailand, right, and announcing, while the prime ministers of the United Nations, that we've taken over the government. There's been too much of that in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I don't think that that's palatable any longer. Latin America and the Caribbean is seen as having moved past that period. So today's coup d'etat are thousands of technicians and consultants and engineers with briefcases full of cash, supplied by organizations like the United States Agency for International Development and the Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA, who are involved in every aspect of a given country's culture and society. Women's organizations, student groups, judges, lawyers, peasant organizations. And rather than being a benevolent, neutral force, because their source of funding are coming from USAID and CIDA, it can only necessarily represent the interests of those governments. You cannot separate the work of a student group being funded by CIDA in Haiti from Canadian foreign policy, any more than you can separate a lawyers group being funded by USAID in Afghanistan from US foreign policy. They're giving that money for a reason. That money does not come without strings. That money is meant to represent, to project that foreign policy, to represent that foreign policy in any given society or country where it's being enacted.
So, for example, CIDA, which is Canadian International Development Agency, which seems to me it used to have a fairly good reputation, puts money into a country like Haiti through citizen groups in Haiti, and yet I guess the leaders of those groups and etc. are chosen because they will be the kind of people that the Canadian government wants.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
There's an organization called the National Coalition for Haitian Rights, which is
National
Coalition for Haitian Rights.
Sounds like a good organization.
And CHR, which is funded by CIDA. The National Coalition for Haitian Rights has also been called police informants because they worked with the Haitian police to create the justification for arresting leadership within the Lavalas movement, creating political prisoners, the arrest, creating the justification for the mass arrest of individuals for no other reason than their political affiliation, which is my definition of political prisoners. That work of the National Coalition for Haitian Rights would not have been possible. Their role in creating political prisoners en masse in Haiti would not have been possible without tremendous funding from CIDA.
So did they?
It enabled them to do that.
Did they create lists of people who were to be arrested?
They would get on the radio. They would make accusations against individuals without proof. Former Prime Minister Yvon Neptune was arrested. The National Coalition for Haitian Rights had accused him of having ordered a massacre which resulted in 50 people being killed
so they would
in a neighborhood called La Syrie in the town of Saint Marc. The United Nations itself determined that the deaths in La Syrie were not the result of any orders given by Prime Minister Yvon Neptune, but were the results of two combatant forces during that period of time, equal combatant forces who were battling it out around the time that Aristide was forced out of the country. By all accounts, he was not guilty of having given the orders for this massacre, yet this man spent more than 2 years in jail based on those false accusations, with all of the charges ultimately dropped, by the way.
Made by
the National Coalition for Haitian Rights, whose primary funding came from the Canadian International Development Agency.
Who says our government can't be effective?
Of course they can, when it serves their purposes. That's the point. And that's one small example. There are countless others of how, in the name of doing good, they are actually involving themselves in social engineering within other countries.
And of course
the assumption is that we have the right to do social engineering in other sovereign nations. That somehow they are less than we are. Somehow they do not have the same. Imagine if the government of Afghanistan or any foreign government were to fund organizations who were making political statements against the Harper government in this country. If other foreign governments were funding student groups, women's groups, labor unions who were openly critical of Harper, do you think that the Harper administration wouldn't scream about sovereignty? Wouldn't say that they didn't have the right to come into Canada and influence our sovereign right to determine our own democratic choices? Of course they would. But yet we believe that Canada and the United States are somehow exempt from what we would not allow ourselves. We believe we can do in the name of quote unquote helping others or protecting others, when in fact what we're really doing is protecting our own interests.
Yeah, and I guess the power of money in a country like Haiti, where there's so much poverty, if you can throw in substantial amounts of money,
you can make a big difference. You can make a heavy impact. And again, I mean, it comes down to this basic point, though. What right do we really have? What kind of arrogance is it to believe that we have the right to determine for other people what the outcome of their elections will be, what the outcome of their choices will be?
Well, we don't. I think most Canadians wouldn't believe that, but we have no say in what our government does. Just as you, as an American,
you guys vote, don't you? Don't you have democracy here?
Well, we vote. We're still allowed to vote, but whether we have democracy or not is an open question. I think we have democracy at about the level of 3.5 to 4 out of 10. We don't really have democracy, or a very weak and failing democracy, and we don't have a free press. So we're in bad shape. Maybe not much better shape than the people of Haiti. We just have more money.
Well, I think that I agree with you, which is that if people did know what was being done in their name, and again, I think we need to put ourselves in the position of people living in other countries, and imagine if what our governments are doing in our name were being done to us here. Would we feel the same about it? If another government came into Canada and started throwing money around in order to destabilize the Harper government, would the Canadian people accept it? I don't think so.
Well, the American government probably does it all the time.
Well, yeah, that's a different story, though. That's our right.
Yeah. Just as an aside, there's a group, an NGO operating out of the United Kingdom, Britain, called the Haiti Support Group, and they objected to the report written by the Lancet magazine, which is one
The British Medical Journal.
British Medical Journal, widely respected magazine. They did a report on violence in Haiti, and the NGO called Haiti Support Group objected to it. Maybe you can just tell us that story.
Well, the Lancet report, its basic conclusions were that during the 22 months of the U.S. installed interim government, the Gerard Latorture regime, at least 8,000 people had been murdered in the area of Port-au-Prince, the capital alone. More than 35,000 women had been subjected to rape and other abuses during that same period of time. The Haiti Support Group and Charles Arthur objected to the report, saying that it couldn't possibly be neutral because one of the authors, Athena Colby, also goes by the pseudonym Lynn Duff, and had taught a radio program at the Aristide Foundation for Democracy. So their claim was that therefore, because she had this other role or association with Aristide, it couldn't be an objective report. I think it's unfortunate that that had to come up. I certainly wish that someone else had done that report so that it would have, this so-called controversy wouldn't have come up. But the truth is that I don't think that they even got it right. I think that there were far more killings than the 8,000. I think that if the Haiti Support Group or any other group has a problem with that report, that they should then back a call for an independent investigation of human rights abuses during that period. There should be a truth commission formed, and let's not be afraid to really get to the truth of this. Let's not be afraid. The victims are still there. The survivors are still there. The families who lost their loved ones are still there. The availability of that testimony is still there to qualify and to quantify. And that rather than attacking this report, I think if anything positive comes out of this attack on this report, it's that we should be demanding that Amnesty International, that Human Rights Watch, that other international organizations get off their asses and now start taking an accurate and true accounting. And they probably never will, and there's a good reason for that. But there's a deeper reason for that. But the point is, rather than attacking that report, then do something about it. If you think it's wrong, then support an independent investigation. Push for an independent investigation, unless you're afraid what the outcome will be. And I sense that Charles Arthur and the Haiti Support Group are afraid of what that outcome will be, because unfortunately they backed that coup. They worked with so-called progressive organizations that supported the coup against the constitutional government in Haiti. And when you talk about the outcome of that coup and the cost of human lives and suffering, I think that they're embarrassed to face that truth of what they were part of, what they helped to participate in, what they helped to create. And that's the real reason that they're attacking the credibility of that report, and it has very little to do with who the author is. It wouldn't matter who the author was. They'd attack it because they don't like the outcome. They don't like the conclusion.
There's a doctrine called the responsibility to protect doctrine, and that was used as a reason for the coup against Aristide in 2004 and for the occupation. And I understand that this responsibility to protect doctrine is used by both Canada and the United States as giving them a reason to do what they do.
It's really Canadian policy. It started under the Martin administration. And it's really justification for Canada's marching in lockstep with the Bush administration. Responsibility to protect who? To protect elites? To protect ruling elites? Certainly
what does the
where
doctrine,
Haiti is concerned.
What does the doctrine state? What is the doctrine?
Well, what it really says is that Canada has a responsibility. If there is a country that is tearing itself apart, that is on the verge of becoming a failed state, that Canada, not we, you guys, that Canada has the right to intervene in order to protect a country from itself, basically is what it's saying. And that's why I asked the question, responsibility to protect who from whom? if you look at the issue of Haiti, Canada has participated with the United States in demonizing a political party, the majority political party, Jean-Bertrand Aristide's Lavalas party, and by doing so has justified murder, slaughter, forcing into exile, political imprisonment of thousands upon thousands of people since Aristide's overthrow February 29, 2004. The truth is that the whole reason that Aristide was elected, the whole reason there was a Lavalas movement, was because of the excesses of the traditional economic elite in Haiti, the 1% of the population that controls more than 50% of the collective wealth. And if we're going to talk about Canada's responsibility to protect, it seems like who they're really protecting is that very same elite.
Are Canadians part of that elite? Does Canada have corporate interests in Haiti?
Of course.
What are they?
There's Saint Genevieve, which has mining interests in Haiti. We know that there are gold fields in the north. There's also been uranium, and Saint Genevieve out of Montreal has mineral rights to large tracts of land in northern Haiti. There are manufacturing firms, apparel firms such as Gildan Activewear. And again...
Now maybe you can just say a few words about that, because I understand it's a very, very big company with a lot of interests in Haiti.
Sure. I mean, this goes to the reason of, I think, what the real stakes are in Haiti for Canada and the United States. And Gildan Activewear is a good example of that. Haiti plays one of the most important roles in the world by virtue of its financial role in the region. And that may sound like an incredible statement, but it's true, in that Haiti helps to hold down the bottom of the price of wage labor in the world. Because it's the cheapest wage in the region. And so, a concrete example of that is Gildan Activewear, this Canadian company, where about 8 months ago, they have factories in Honduras and Mexico and in Haiti. But the majority, the bulk of their manufacturing facilities are in Honduras and Mexico. Well, the Honduran unions and the Mexican unions got together to demand higher wages and better working conditions from Gildan Activewear. Gildan Activewear's response was to threaten to move their operations to Haiti exclusively. That was enough of a threat, a credible threat, by virtue of its cheaper labor, to put down the workers' demands, the union demands in Honduras and Mexico, which would have ended up costing millions and millions of dollars to the bottom line of the corporation, profits of the corporation. So in this way, Haiti plays a very extreme, one of the most important roles in the world by virtue of it being a threat that's used by used by large companies against workers throughout the world as a potential place for doing business because of its cheaper labor force.
So we see a Canadian company playing a very important role in the world's economic order by maintaining the lowest possible wage levels almost in the world, perhaps. And then we see the government of that country overthrown, a government that was trying to do something for the poor people of that country. So what's the role of the Canadian government in the overthrow of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was trying to do good things under the name of the responsibility to protect doctrine? That's the... But what really? I mean, here we are. This is going to be on TV in Canada. Canadians are going to be seeing this. Most Canadians have no idea of what's going on.
Well,
in
there are
Haiti.
these other.
What is the role of
There
Canada?
are these huge concentric circles of organizations, like the International Foundation of Electoral Systems, called IFES. IFES works hand in hand with the United States Agency for International Development and the Canadian International Development Agency. And again, what does it do? It works with professional organizations, judges groups, lawyers groups, student groups, different professional groups within the example Haitian society. They're also in Venezuela now, doing the same thing in Venezuela. And what do? They use that money given by the Canadian government and the US government in order to build an opposition to a government that they do not like, that is not considered to be playing ball with US foreign policy first, but secondly, with the dictates of financial policy of organizations like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Because all of this, remember, is being done on behalf of business, what their conception of doing business is. And their conception of doing business is to continue working with these elites in these countries such as Haiti. But not just Haiti, in Nicaragua and El Salvador, this is about elites helping elites. And most of these elites are not even what you would consider free market capitalists. Right? They always talk, even the Canadians talk about free market capitalism. We have to have these rules that are organized, that organize us to allow free trade so that we have unfettered access to other markets to sell our products, sell Canadian goods, sell American goods throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, right? Well, who do you think are their representatives in those countries? Do you think it's poor people? No, the representatives who represent their franchises, the people who run their factories for them, who have the lands, who organize the factories, who hire the workers, are members of tiny, wealthy elites in those countries. That's who they're most comfortable doing business with, and therefore, they are the main beneficiaries of that foreign policy, whether you call it the responsibility to protect, or whether you call it the responsibility to intervene. The main beneficiary are the same small elites who have shown time and time again that they will resort to violence, they will resort to corruption in order to maintain their power and privilege.
Of course. So the responsibility to protect doctrine is a doctrine of the government of Canada only, or other countries as well?
Well, they're the only ones who've adopted that language.
Because it's a very powerful, I mean, this gives, if other nations adopt it, it gives a nation the right within their own country to go anywhere in the world and overthrow governments or do whatever they want to in the name of protecting the people.
That's right, that's right. And that's why it's nefarious, and that's why it's dangerous, and it's under the guise of somehow being in the best interests of the people who you are claiming the right to protect.
Yeah,
right?
Well, you can't say we're going in there to help the millionaires. I mean, that wouldn't look good, so you have to say we're going in there to help the people.
You know, and again, I mean, you got to look at the end result of this. After all of these murders in Haiti, after this 2 years of nightmarish hell, gross human rights violations, the way in which the traditional small elite in that country do business is not being changed one iota. The very thing that brought on this great chasm between the wealthy and the poor in that country is not being addressed.
Can you just go over very quickly exactly how Aristide was removed from power? I mean, the story that we've heard is that the U.S. government sent in troops into Haiti and they kidnapped him. It started long
before that.
But did that actually happen on that day?
Well, sure, but I mean, it started long before that. I mean, again, I described this process of destabilizing the government, and that process involved accusing the Aristide government of human rights violations, portraying it as a violator of human rights, casting the popular movement which elected it as a violent movement at the behest of this wannabe dictator. A lot of this involved propaganda, and a lot of this involved stage managing, which the United States, Canada, and France were deeply involved in order to justify the overthrow of Aristide. It involved isolating it economically. It involved using these paramilitaries in the Dominican Republic to provoke violence from Lavalas, from the supporters of Aristide, knowing that the coup was going to come, having the experience of the first coup, 1991. What do you think? How do you think that they responded when those paramilitaries came over from the Dominican Republic and started killing Lavalas supporters? Well, they responded to want to defend themselves. But that was spun by Canada, the United States, and France as being a violent movement of the dictator Aristide. So there was this propaganda campaign, destabilization, economic isolation, and then ultimately the final coup de grace, which was these paramilitaries coming over from the Dominican Republic and taking over townships. There was also tremendous money that was spent on student groups, on peasant groups, on women's groups, again, through CEDA and USAID, who were only funded if they were vocally in opposition to the Aristide government. Any organization, grassroots organization, that did not voice opposition to the Aristide government, in most cases, vocally demand his resignation, were not funded by CEDA and USAID. Any group associated with Lavalas was completely taken out of the funding loop. So there was this building of this campaign. Disinformation, destabilization, economic isolation, paramilitary attacks, finally, leading up to this moment, February 29th, where 50 US Marines show up at Aristide's residence and say, you don't have a choice, you're going on a plane.
So he was kidnapped and removed from the country.
He was forcibly put on a plane against his will by 50 US Marines, according to him, driven to the airport in Port-au-Prince at 3:30 in the morning and flown to the Central African Republic. He appeared in Bangui. None of us even knew where the hell Bangui was until he appeared there. And the next day, through Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Congressman Charles Rangel, the former founder of Trans-Africa, Randall Robinson, he was able to communicate to the world that he was kidnapped, taken against his will.
So where is he now?
South Africa. He went back to Jamaica for a short time, and the United States had a fit. Condoleezza Rice threatened the Jamaican government, and finally the South African government, which of course is now the ruling party is the African National Congress, the ANC. Thabo Mbeki is the president. They offered him exile, he and his family, and that's where he continues to reside.
And then a Mr. Preval was then elected. There were elections following that.
Well, it's funny, you know, I told you earlier that in 1995, Preval was elected president when I was working on my first film. And it's funny, in 1999, when I first went to move to Haiti, Preval was president, right? It was his last year in office. And the people who were doing security in Haiti were the United Nations. When I left in March of this year, Preval was president, and it was the United Nations who were doing security. So for me, it's been this big circle. It's almost like running on a treadmill as far as...
Who is Preval? What are his politics? Where does he stand in relation to Aristide, in relation to standing up for the people of Haiti?
Well, he was Aristide's first prime minister before that brutal military coup in 1991. He had to go into exile with Aristide. He never saw himself as a member of Lavalas, though I have interviews of him during that period where he talks in detail about what he believes Lavalas and the Lavalas movement to represent.
Lavalas is the party?
The party of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. Well, first a movement and later it became a party, Famille Lavalas, the Lavalas family. Today, Preval's in the unenviable position of being a figurehead, a symbol for the quote-unquote successes of the international community, which means really that Haitians are not running Haiti, which means really that Preval cannot initiate any independent political action without consultation, without the approval of the quote-unquote international community.
So Kevin, what can Canadians do about the situation?
I think that, first of all, they have to quit listening to CEDA-funded organizations. They have to quit listening to alternative organizations like that have a vested interest in representing Canadian foreign policy on the ground in Haiti. Canadians need to start listening to authentic, independent voices on the ground in Haiti. There are organizations here. There's a solidarity movement, CHAN, the Canadian Haiti Action Network, nationally, that's working daily around the issue in Haiti. There's a group here in Victoria. There's a group in Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa, as far away as Halifax. There are organizations that are have relationships, authentic relationships with groups, grassroots organizations on the ground in Haiti, so that there's no excuse for not getting the other side of the story. It's available if people will only take the time and have the courage.
You know, it's more like there is no story, because the word Haiti virtually never comes up into conversation now. It's a story that's basically gone. I mean, it's in the past. It's not happening. There's no information coming through at all. That's basically the story here. I don't know what we can do to get information out, but
I've seen Haiti in the news recently here in Canada. I'm trying to remember specifically, but it was recently in the news again. I mean, okay, maybe we need to do more work in putting it back in the headlines. Certainly in the United States, we need to do more of that work. But again, what it comes down to is that we either take responsibility for what is being done in our name, or we're complicit. And the truth is that what's being done in our name has represented the elite in that country, the interests of the ruling elite in that country, has represented a Haitian police who've been responsible for gross human rights violations, has represented a judiciary which has been responsible for political persecution and holding political prisoners. And all of this is being done in our name with our tax dollars. And we either accept that and accept that we're complicit, or we find out more about it and we try to change it. And I think that most people, are good at heart, and that if given the choice, will make the right decision. I mean, I truly believe that. I haven't grown, despite all that I've seen, and I've seen a lot, I haven't grown that cynical. That I don't believe that people will make the right choice if given the truth, if given the real information about what's going on.
I agree with you. So thank you. That's Kevin Pina from Oakland, California, talking about the situation in Haiti. And Kevin has been in and out of Haiti as a documentary filmmaker for years.
I lived there for 7 years. I just moved back to Oakland 4 months ago after living 7 years in Haiti.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Jack.